Welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. I'm your host, Shaun. Haney, thanks a lot for joining us here today on the broadcast. Of course, we're doing a RealAg Live every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 1 o'clock Mountain. Today, we're really going to break down some ag policy. We're talking about some of the biggest issues that are impacting our industry across this country. If you have any questions for today's guest, all you got to do is type them into the comment box of the platform you're watching on, whether that's Twitter, or that's Facebook, or that is YouTube. So we'll take as many questions as we possibly can. I know I have a whole bunch here for today's guest. It is Mary Robinson. She is president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. Mary, how are you today?
I'm great, Shaun. How are you?
I'm doing good. Well, thanks a lot for joining us here. This is we've had a chance to get to know each other since you became president of CFA. We've seen each other many times out on the road at all the conferences. It's been a little weird here as of late as I haven't gone anywhere since the first week of March. How you been holding up with lack of travel?
Actually, it's been quite a treat because I think I got travel saturated there by the middle of March. So it was pretty nice to come home and have to stay home, although the circumstances certainly are not what I wish for.
Yeah, I hear you. So, Mary, your family farms in Prince Edward Island. Tell us a little bit about your farm.
So we're kind of one of those people, one of those families that have stuck with it for a while. We came here in 1810 and we've been at it ever since. So right now what our farm looks like is we crop about 2,000 acres. 500 of that we lease out for potato production, and then we've got soybeans, barley, and hay. So we're in a 4-year rotation, and we've got some agribusinesses as well. So we're in the input business, and we're in the packing business, and we're in the dealership business. So not all our eggs are in one basket.
Nice. How are the crops looking out there on the island?
Dry. It's been very, very dry. So we're hoping for some rain, I think, late this week. I know it's been a while. And we had a really weird spring. Like, we didn't get rain this spring. People worked straight through, more or less. We had a lot of wind, but it was just a very different spring.
Mary, I know you've been working hard on many of these files. It has been, I think if I use the word interesting, I'm probably not describing it as well as I should be. One of the biggest issues this spring has been the getting the temporary foreign worker issue sorted out, and it kind of continues here even today because of some of the issues that we're having in terms of some of the cases on some of these Ontario farms. Do we actually have enough temporary foreign workers on the ground in Canada right now?
No, I know farms, depending on what your season is and what your crop is and what the work is you're looking to have done by your foreign workers, there's, a steady inflow and outflow of workers coming to and from Canada. And I have a neighbor who is the largest strawberry producer in PEI, and he's waiting for, I believe, 11 Mexicans, and they should be coming any day now. So he's an example of someone waiting for workers.
Yeah, we saw, was it Sunday or Saturday, where Mexico basically said they would ship no more workers were going to come to Canada. They have changed their minds since then because they said Canada had made them feel comfortable that changes had been made. Short-term setback, or what was kind of your insight on that whole thing?
So I think that the actual statement was they were going to hit pause on sending workers to farms that had COVID active on their farm. They didn't stop workers coming to Canada like straight across the board. It was very targeted. And since then, we understand that if farms that have had COVID are able to prove that they have the correct protocols and that Mexican workers are going to be safe on their farm, that Mexico will send them workers as well. So a pretty big concern. Obviously, COVID has highlighted a lot of vulnerabilities that we maybe didn't pay a lot of attention to prior to COVID. So we definitely need to have resolution to this. And it's not only important for Canadian farmers and the entire food supply chain and all Canadians, but it's also really important to those workers who come here. You've probably heard me say before, Shaun, that in Eastern Canada, we always used to head out to Alberta where the big money was and work in the oil. And there's a lot of people. I grew up with friends whose parents, fathers would go out and they'd be away from their family for quite a while and they'd go to make the big money and there were sacrifices. So it was important for their family to access that work because they'd come home and then they'd have enough money to pay for hockey and put food on the shelves.
Yeah.
So I think Mexican kids probably aren't looking to play hockey, but I think they're probably, families are really reliant on this money that goes to their countries.
I was on more than one flight from Calgary to Toronto when there was a whole bunch of Maritimers returning home after being on their oil patch shift, and they were celebrating. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Atlantic Canadians know how to celebrate.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So before we leave the worker conversation, there has been some migrant workers that have passed. They have died due to COVID-19. What is CFA's response to government been on this? Premier Ford has been somewhat critical of agriculture and whether or not some of these people received proper testing in this situation. What's the CFA's standpoint?
Well, we did release we put a news release out today, and in that we highlighted that, COVID has certainly created a lot of challenges, and I don't think any sector or any country was prepared for this. So we're all learning as we go, but to see three men come to Canada to work and lose their lives is absolutely devastating. It's devastating, obviously, for them and their loved ones and their families, but it takes quite a heavy toll, I would think, on the farmers themselves, who the ones who are directly involved in it, and other farmers who use temporary farm workers. It's pretty serious. You don't get much more serious than that. So what CFA has asked is that there is a very quick getting to the root of the problem investigation, and that we put in place the measures necessary to avoid this happening again. It's not good for anyone. No one wants this to happen.
Yeah, agreed. CFA has launched a new campaign. Tell us about its focus and who it's targeted towards.
So I was really interested to listen to your interview with Daryl Bricker, because I thought his message from Ipsos was very much dovetailed with CFA's campaign. What we've done is we've pulled together a group of national campaign partners. There's 8 of them, and I'd mention them if you don't mind, because I think it's important for people in agriculture to know who is silently supporting such an important campaign. We have MNP, Syngenta, CSGA and CSTA, CN Rail, Nutrien, and the Canadian Cattlemen, as well as the Canadian Pork Council. And these folks have stepped up to the plate, put some money on the table, and are really trusting CFA and Edelman to walk us through this campaign. So the end goal of the campaign is to move the needle with government. Right now, if we look across the country, we're seeing a much higher level of engagement and awareness from suburbanites and urbanites in regard to where does their food come from, because for the first time in most people's lives, they went to a grocery store and what they were looking for was not on the shelf.
Yeah.
So the campaign is going to focus on a couple of urban areas, GTA and Vancouver, and the messages are going to be very much, they're out there now. They're not at all meant to fearmonger. It's to build on the positive energy that agriculture brings Canada.
Does it tie to this idea that agriculture is part of the solution in terms of the economic recovery?
Well, we did, through social listening, we identified there was kind of 3 main areas of concern, and that was supply chain disruptions, food supply, it was rising costs, and jobs in the economy. So a lot of our messaging is going to kind of build on that. to create awareness of what agriculture does. You know, the tagline that 1 in 8 jobs in Canada is brought to you by agri-food. And building that awareness within our city centers, even, you know, servers at your favorite restaurant rely on farmers doing their job.
Okay.
So hopefully at the end of the what it all culminates to is that person seeing a graphic, whether it's on Gmail or Instagram or Facebook, and following that graphic with a catchy tagline, and they'll come to a landing page where they can enter their name and their postal code, click send, and a letter goes off to their MP, basically saying Canadian food and Canadian farmers matters to me. I want to see my government invest in this.
And so basically, I perceive this a little bit, okay, we're a bit of a standstill in being able to influence the government. We need to influence the voters. That's why we're targeting urban centers.
Yeah, and that's what your message from Daryl was, right? If you look at how our governments, where the power is, it's in suburbia and in urban Canada. So if you have a look at cabinet or our Liberal MPs, they're predominantly coming from those areas. So we'll get their attention because it's a very viable message. I don't think anyone would dispute it. And then on the other side, we'll be working with Edelman, who is the firm that we've engaged for this, to develop our government relations strategy and really find out where we can find common ground with government and move forward in a meaningful way to make a difference for producers in Canada.
Okay, I got a couple questions coming in. You ready for some questions, Mary? Okay. Tied to the last thing we talked about, Danny Ottenbright, who's from Grayson, Saskatchewan. He is involved with APAS, which is a member of CFA. Danny wants to know, why is the Liberal government so disinterested in fixing the problems in Canadian agriculture?
Well, that's such an easy question. Great question. And I think what we have learned is Canadian agriculture has done such a fantastic job of putting food on the shelves that a lot of people just haven't had to give it a second thought, not even a first thought. It's just there. So we've built up this complacency, and it's so obvious in our government. And there's a lack of understanding, I think, as to how complex and how impressive agriculture and agri-food is in Canada. So hopefully through our campaign, we're going to get some attention here, get them to the table, and have some, you know, I thought we were home free when we had the Barton report come out. And then we had RBC put Farmer 4.0 out. And it was like, wow, all of the, you know, these guys are all members of the same club. Surely they're going to listen to their peers say, hey, by the way, there's this massive opportunity for ROI over here called agriculture. Come on, government, let's make some meaningful investment. So we'll continue to beat the drum and try to crack that nut. And any suggestions you might have, please send me a note.
Yeah. I know a lot of people in farm country are frustrated by this right now. They're looking for some wins. There are some, you know, Protein Industries Canada, I think, is a win. I think it's a good program. There's needed dollars to expand our plant protein processing sector is an example. The railway bill that was a couple of years ago. That was a win. But there's some of these other files. I think farmers and ranchers would agree that we're kind of coming up short. In terms of your lobbying effort, though, knowing what you know now, sitting here today, has there been any effort in expanding who you're speaking to? So, of course, Minister Bobo is somebody that ag lobbyists are talking to all the time. But what about some of the other portfolios, infrastructure, health, rural development? Are you talking to those ministers too frequently?
So we have we've appeared as witnesses before standing committees for a good number of those. And we have been in fairly constant contact with the PMO, as well as the Minister of Finance's office. And obviously labor and immigration we've been in touch with in regard to our foreign worker situation. So we are working with many different departments, and I have to give a shout out to Todd from APAS, Todd Lewis, is an absolute rock. He's a fantastic guy, certainly not only a great advocate for APAS, but for Canadian agriculture as a whole. So really appreciate the work that Todd's helped us get done.
Danny made a follow-up statement. He says, everyone but government seems to get what ag can do to boost the Canadian economy to the next level. So that's
Danny for Prime Minister?
Danny for Prime Minister. There you go. That would be interesting.
Excellent.
Yeah. From Grayson, Saskatchewan to Ottawa. It's like, what a story. What a story. What else we got here? Lindsay has a question. What's CFA's vision for a new/updated suite of federal business risk management programs? What's that look like?
Well, obviously the ones we have aren't working, and we've kind of maybe stood on the tallest mountain we could find and shouted that as loud as we could. And it's been an exercise in frustration. But I think our ask has been pretty consistent. If we get back to 85% coverage and we remove the reference margin limit, that would go a long way. I think there's been a lot of frustration around the calls from government for producers to draw down their agri-invest accounts. We've asked for some greater transparency on that so we could understand where is that money? Because we know that the degree of hurt felt by different commodities is different. So if you're a pork producer, you're feeling it differently than a grain producer. So if you're a grain producer and you're sitting with a tidy sum in your agri-invest, why are you going to draw it down? So in regard to BRM, we continue to ask government for greater transparency on that, because it seems like an unfair kind of accusation, almost, not even request.
Mary, my perception has been that we're kind of in the BRM discussion, we're kind of at this point where, in an old Western movie where you got the two cowboys and they walk out of the saloon and they're squared off against each other and they're going to draw. It's kind of that standoff where farmers and ranchers are saying, we need changes for us to enroll in these programs. There's no point in enrolling if they don't work. The other cowpoke is saying, government is saying, listen, we're not going to, there's a program here not even using. How do you know it doesn't work if you're not signed up? And here we sit. And I kind of think there's a big gap in the middle. And I don't know. I'm not too positive that we're going to have a lot of changes very soon. Am I being cynical?
I don't think you're being cynical, but we did have indication from government early days in COVID that we shouldn't take our foot off the gas on our BRM requests. So I think once the dust settles on COVID, which I think everyone feels and hopes it's soon, and we take a look around at how we're going to pull ourselves out of this, if we're faced with a potential $300 billion deficit, there's not too many sectors that are going to be able to contribute and drive that economic engine like agriculture. So I think, unfortunately, it might take that before we get government's attention.
I got a question here, change of pace. Question from somebody I think very interested in the future in the cannabis industry, 9-inch Colas, says, any suggestions for how a newly certified horticulture student in Ontario can cut his teeth in the ag hort field? You hearing about any future opportunity? Like, where is there? I know you talk a lot of times about aquaculture and the opportunities there. What about in the horticulture field? There's a lot of rage about hemp and cannabis, but that's sort of flamed out a little bit. What are you hearing?
Flamed out.
You like that?
Well, horticulture is pretty broad. Potatoes are horticulture. You got your apples, you got all your tender fruits, you got a whole lot of horticulture, asparagus, broccoli. So fairly broad question. I guess if I was a new hort special specialist grad, I would be reaching out to the Canadian Hort Council, which has got some amazing information on their website and gives you a pretty good glimpse into just how broad and how deep horticulture is in Canada. And I don't know if you're looking for a job in research, if you're looking for a job in kind of crop advising, there are endless opportunities. Drone flyer, take your pick.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? Honestly, one thing that our industry is not short of is open positions. We need a long-term labor strategy.
Yes, we do.
How do we do that? What does that look like?
Well, I think when COVID is over, we're going to have to, I hope, sit down with government and have a look at what worked and what didn't work in regard to all the responses, what we threw at the wall, what stuck, what didn't stick. And I think we're going to have a serious labor strategy developed. We've seen the Canadian Ag HR Council calling for it for quite some time. CFA has been a big supporter of it. You know the numbers. We brought in just under 60,000 foreign workers, while at the same time we had over 16,000 unfilled jobs, and some of those would have been in horticulture, for your last question asker. Yeah. So long term, we do need a strategy, and it's a complex issue. It's an incredibly complex issue. Robotics and technology are probably part of that. But I think anyone who doesn't know about the Canadian Ag HR Council, have a look at them. They do some incredible work. They've got some meaningful numbers that really help build an argument or a case for more strategy around labor.
I've been banging this drum for the last 2 days. We're seeing the U.S. until the end of the year continue to limit high-skilled work visas into the country. I think this is a huge opportunity for Canada to say, not just in the tech industry, but high-skilled labor, people in research, attract them to Canada when the U.S. is saying no to them. I think there's a huge opportunity for Canada to fill some of this labor gap.
Yep. I don't disagree with you at all. And we know, one of the frustrations in agriculture is that when you apply when you do your LMIA, you have to wait for quite some time before you get approval or before you find out you're getting your workers. And the tech side, I think it's a guaranteed 20 business day turnaround. So if you're looking to bring a foreign worker in to work in your tech industry, you can do that pretty easily. The Canadian government has been pretty friendly to that.
Question here from Ken, Mary. Now, you have a diverse group in your CFA umbrella. Part of that is the dairy industry. Ken asked I think Ken's from Ontario. He says, why does supply management seem to get all the love from government? Seems like they are the only group with government's ear right now. They're even getting a check while still keeping their quota. Does the dairy industry are they the only ones with the ear of government? What are your thoughts on that?
I think dairy has done a pretty fantastic job in their lobbying efforts for sure. They're very well organized, and they've got a system that they've managed to maintain and I think does bring a lot of good to rural Canada and to the Canadian economy as a whole. I think if we look around at other groups, we see some pretty successful lobbying too, like the Canadian cattlemen. Wow, what an impressive force in Ottawa they are. I guess I would hope that when we look at the dairy guys, that we don't say they're getting too much, but instead say, how do we get that much? Because we don't want to step on the shoulders of our brethren as we're trying to get to where we're going. I think the dairy industry, it's been an effort of mine as well as my VPs, Keith Curry and Chris Vandenhovel, to foster more collaboration within agriculture. Because the more we do to help each other along, like, they talk about this huge soft power that we're missing out on as a united agriculture. So when you look at our national campaign that we've undertaken, to know that we've got supply managed, we've got the SM5 at the table, and we also have CCA and CPC. And I think that is a fantastic statement. And moving forward, the more of that we can do, then I think the bigger our stick is going to be, and we can walk softly and wield that stick successfully.
Yeah.
So I really hope we get there. So I'm reluctant to to throw any commodity under the bus for what they've done. Instead, I think we better learn from what they've done successfully and adopt it in other commodities.
I remind groups all the time that's your perception that they have all the power. Ask people in the dairy industry; they'll tell you that I don't know what's going on here. We're giving up all this market access and all these trade deals. We don't have any influence. So I think it depends on your perspective on where you are in the industry. I will say this though, Mary. You mentioned it. You mentioned the CCA and some of the lobbying that they do. My personal opinion is I think it's been incredibly refreshing to see some of these groups, dairy working with beef on some of the climate and file and also like the food guide as an example. CFA having a joint press conference with the Canadian Pork Council and the CCA in terms of government assistance. We're kind of catching some momentum here in terms of groups working together that traditionally they didn't. I think it's positive.
I agree. I think we've seen such untapped potential as far as the United Agriculture, what that brings to us. I hope we're able to get there. And I know there's always going to be issues we don't agree on. I grew up in the potato industry, and I can tell you it's like the Baptist church. There's got to be 500 different veins of it. So when you look at the potato industry, you got your seed guys, your processing guys, your packing guys. You got so many different. Once you get down into it, yes, you can pit people against each other, but ultimately we're all potatoes, so we got to work together. And the same in agriculture. So much of what we need as far as policy applies to just about every facet of agriculture.
If we think back to prior to the last funding announcement the government made that included some of the livestock set aside and some of the processor funding, the week prior to that announcement, CFAA said, there needs to be $2.6 billion here. What in hindsight, do you think that to ask for that big of a dollar figure? Was that the right move, or how do you look at that now in retrospect? Because we've had guests on that have said, CFA was entirely correct in doing that. They're right. And we've had other guests that have said, man, that's a crazy number. How did they get to that number? How do you look at this now?
So I guess when you do something, you open yourself up for comments after the fact as to whether it was the right or wrong thing to do. So we had to do something. And we were getting indication from within government that they needed a number. We weren't super keen to put that together. There's a lot of information in a number that you get nervous about. But we felt that it was where we needed to go to further our conversations with government. So that's why we did the number. It wasn't us coming up with a willy-nilly number and looking for the blank check. It was a number that came about from across commodity, across the country scan. And those numbers are brought together, and the 2.6 billion number was come to. And then we had something, government just kept saying, we need a number, we need a number, we need a number. And I guess, from their perspective, they were doling out money. And I guess you do have to look at the price tag at some point in time. And we were there in that moment.
They were maybe looking for a smaller number, but they were looking for a number, just a smaller one.
Well, we tried to give them a factual number.
Yeah.
If you're coming up with the number, where do you go with it? What would you have done? And hindsight certainly gives you a lot of luxury in what that number should have looked like.
It
but
does.
I think it was necessary for us to move forward in the conversation.
Where are we at in the conversation? Where are we at with the conversation now? How have things kind of cooled down somewhat, or where are we at in that conversation now?
We're getting the sense from government that they are in COVID firefighting mode, right? That's where their focus is. So right now, we're asking them to make a commitment to us that at the FPT in October, that we have a meaningful reply on BRM. We're asking them to right now create some money availability for farms to properly gear up to respond to COVID, because we know there was $1,500 for temporary farm worker isolation assistance, but we know that those costs continue to go on, whether you have foreign labor or domestic labor. And, 80% of our ag labor is still domestic. It's only 20% that's foreign, more or less. So the costs that we're all incurring with our, plexiglass between the shoulders of people on the planter, with our masks, their hand sanitizer, with additional porta potties, with all the things that people have to do in order to fight COVID, we're asking for money for that because those are not allowable expenses right now. And we're also pushing them for some kind of allowance for people who are on CERB to have a wage top up to incentivize them to come and work on farm. Because I think that it's been a huge frustration to compete with CERB.
Yeah. Oh boy, I'll tell you what, I've heard that from a lot of people. Not just in agriculture, but I talked to the guy that worked on my irrigation system. He's like, I can't hire anybody, right? It's not just agriculture. Question here from Josh. I know this is a topic you're pretty passionate about, Mary. How are we going to engage youth in agriculture?
That will definitely have to be part of our labor strategy. There are some fantastic efforts afoot now. You've got ag in the classroom, and you've got just the general level of awareness with adults is going to help increase the awareness of agriculture in youth. And the campaign we're doing with Edelman, we hope that may extend. If that's successful, that may extend. And everything we do to put a positive and informative face and voice in an urban and suburban setting for agriculture helps contribute to the solution. But as you said earlier, there's all kinds of opportunities in agriculture. What's the stat? Remind me, for every graduate coming out of an ag college right now, there's 7 jobs or?
Oh, yeah, I think something like that. Yeah, 6 maybe. Yeah. It's higher than you would think think.
Yeah. But again, any suggestions, any advice on how we help engage youth, please pass them along.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we focus too on only the primary piece of this. There is a lot of jobs in agriculture, and the primary, like we need youth being interested in primary agriculture too. Don't get me wrong, but it's bigger than that. There are people in research. There's retail. There's the commercial side, like marketing. There is. If you want to be behind a microscope the rest of your life, what better industry to do that than agriculture? It's pretty expansive. Mary, a good question here from Ken. Ken says or asks, as a woman ag leader, how is the ag industry doing with inclusion and helping women and other voices of minorities to be heard? Have you had to deal with much discrimination as an ag leader? There's a good question.
Oof.
This audience gets deep. I should have warned you. There are some deep questions every once in a while. There you go. Thanks, Ken.
Yes, thank you, Ken. I haven't really haven't run into too much. I think, unfortunately, most women, I certainly can't speak for minorities, but I think I can speak from a woman's perspective. You're always going to run into something that you have to deal with. And I started learning those things like most women do at a very, very young age, how to pivot, deflect, move on, get to where you need to go without getting dragged down by whoever it is that's got the wrong agenda. In regard to how we're doing in agriculture, well, I kind of think we suck. I think we need to see not only more women, but we need to see more youth, and we need to see more minorities, visible minorities. I've sat on a bunch of different committees and councils, and I can count on one hand how many people of color have taken part on those committees and councils and boards. And that's partly a reflection of urban Canada kind of traditionally being a white place, but I know that's changing. I don't know what it looks like in your neighborhood, but we're seeing, quite an influx of new Canadians, and these people are exciting. I've got a family here that's from Syria, and to watch these people work and the passion they have when they come to work, it embarrasses me because I feel like as a seventh generation Canadian, I've become pretty complacent. You see people with real passion and appreciation for what this country offers. So I think we've got so many new immigrants that we could be tapping into, and that would bring us, a wealth of knowledge, of experience, perspective, and some encouragement. Like, we look around, we're so fortunate. So I think we need to do better, and I think we need to do a lot better.
Yeah, adding any kind of diversity to conversations, it creates better outcomes. I think that's definitely very, very much the case. And you look, and I think it depends on the area of agriculture we talk about. If we look at the science community, like go to a plant breeder meeting in Canada, you will see a lot of diversity. As an example, or I live in Lethbridge, and the Lethbridge Research Station is here. Walk onto campus there. You'll see a lot of diversity. So it is happening. It's just probably not, as you said, not as widespread across all the different sectors for sure. So
yeah.
And one last comment. Josh says gender equality is ranked highly at the FAO to increase food security. So Josh makes that point. Thanks a lot, Josh. Appreciate it. He's watching on Facebook. Mary, this has been a blast. We blew through 40 minutes. Look at that. just like that.
I didn't believe.
I said it would go fast. You didn't believe me. We've been talking to Mary Robinson. She is president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture based out of Prince Edward Island. Mary, I always enjoy our discussions. I always learn something. You have a great perspective. You do a lot of work lobbying for the betterment of agriculture and trying to raise us up that totem pole in terms of where we fit in the national landscape. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shaun. And right back at you. You do a pretty awesome job. You make people feel comfortable. And I love that your focus is to make agriculture better, too.
Oh, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. If you have any feedback at all, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us on any of our social platforms. Usually our handle is @realagriculture. Or you can call the Real Ag listener line, 855-776-6147. Tomorrow on Real Ag Live, we'll be talking to Neil Townsend of FarmLink Marketing Solutions. We're talking the markets. Also tomorrow on Real Ag Radio, on Rural Radio 147, too many R's, we'll have a farmer rapid fire. And don't forget to tune in today. Mary talked about Daryl Bricker. That conversation is on today's show. It is at 4:30 Eastern. It's coming up. Don't miss it on satellite radio. Mary, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Shaun.